If you've got a large blank wall to decorate and you've always been inspired by the French Boiserie style, join us and we'll show you exactly how we created this beautiful wall. Hi, I'm Trish and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I hope to earn your subscription today. The first thing to consider when designing your plan is the size of your wall. The traditional rule of thirds is a great rule to follow. Depending on the size of your wall, you can split it up however you wish for a balanced classic look. For the bottom 1/3, we decided to make a board and batten style of wainscoting, using a chair rail styles and the bottom board, which was our already existing baseboard. The chair rail is typically placed at about 1/3 of the wall height, but adjusted slightly to match furniture heights that are nearby. When choosing the chair rail, you want it wide enough to create a strong horizontal visual break, but not overpower the styles. Here, there's a bunch of things to think about when choosing your chair rail, but ultimately, whatever is available might be what you have to go with. The styles are the pieces that come down from the chair rail, and they're typically 1 to 4 inches wide. Really, again, it has to do with availability, but make sure the thickness of the styles is less than or equal to the thickness of the chair rail and your baseboard for the most balanced look. Next, you need to choose your style spacing. Consider the size of the wall and the width of the style. The wider the styles are, the farther apart you can place them and still get a balanced look. The chair rail is usually about 1.5 times the style width in order to create a visual anchor. Here's a super easy way to calculate the number and spacing of the styles. Measure the width of the wall and decide on the spacing between the styles and the width of the styles for the desired look. For our example, our styles are 1.5 inch wide and we chose a spacing of 20 inches. To calculate the approximate number of panels, simply take the width of the wall and divide it by your desired spacing of styles. Most likely this number will not be a whole number, so round it down or up to the nearest whole number. So for us, that means we're going to have 10 panels. To calculate the exact spacing between the styles from center to center, take the total width of the wall divided by your number of panels. So for us, that's going to be 20.55 inches. To calculate the number of styles needed, we're going to need 1 on each side of each panel. Doing it this way, we believe, is the most visually appealing as you have a style in each corner. And we recommend using a corner piece that's a similar width to your style for those 2 corners. Next, we highly recommend testing the layout using painter's tape and mark the placement of the chair rail and the styles to visualize the design. The best way to do this is to start in one corner and measure where the center of the style will be, then simply extend the line down with a level and place your painter's tape. The upper 2/3 of our wall is the Boiserie French-inspired molding. We used a combination of picture frame moldings and Boiserie-inspired molding, which is a French ornate decorative molding from the 17th and 18th centuries. We're double layering our moldings to give a detailed and delicate look. The first step is to choose the number of panels you'd like to have on the wall. Horizontally, you can have 2 to 4 panels for a large wall. Next, determine the panel spacing. Be consistent in the spacing between the walls, the ceiling, and the moldings. Definitely play around with different spacing using painter's tape. Next, calculate your panel dimensions. Panels are often rectangular with a height to width ratio of 1.5 to 1 to 2 to 1. Here's an example calculation of panel dimensions. Our wall height is 108 inches, and we're going to use 2/3 of that height for our panels, 72 inches. We're also going to add spacing at the top and the bottom of 7 inches each, leaving 58 inches of usable height. Adding the spacing on our sides leaves us with 168 inches of usable width. So we divide the wall into 3 vertical sections with pleasing dimensions, decide on the spacing between the panels, and we decided about 10 inches based on the size of the wall. And then you've got your final dimensions of each of your panels. And we highly recommend measuring and marking your wall and then testing the layout with painter's tape. This way you can really see what it's going to look like. And as you can tell, we decided to make our dimensions a little bit larger than originally planned. So make sure to step back and have a look until you're happy with how it looks. The last part of the planning is to choose your frame width and style. We recommend a narrower width for smaller panels or more modern designs, and a wider molding for a more traditional look. It also may depend on what you can get your hands on. We chose to do the double frame with the outer frame being MDF edging and the inner frame a wood decorative molding. And that's because it was the nicest one we could find within a decent price range. We're ready to start building. So first we started building the wainscoting by measuring and cutting the chair rail. We recommend continuing this wainscoting around the room. So therefore, you need to cut the corners at a 45-degree angle. We recommend drawing the 45-degree angle onto your board before cutting it, and then bringing it to your miter saw and cutting it on its short edge at a 45-degree angle. If you've already had it drawn on there, it's not so confusing which direction you're going to cut it. Then just cut your corners at opposite 45-degree angles to create the perfect seam. Mark a couple of spots in which you can line up your chair rail to be perfectly level. Then add your glue to the back of the chair rail piece. Make sure to pull off those tape we forgot the first time. Check that it's level, and then secure it with your brad nails with a nail gun. Then just simply repeat this process, ensuring that your chair rail is nice and level. And then when you reach the corner piece, we found the easiest way to measure these corners is to actually cut the 45-degree angle on the miter saw first. Then place the piece into the corner, lining it up with the rest of your chair rail, and just mark it with a pencil. Of course, you can double check this with your measurement, but we just find this a little more accurate. Then just cut it on your miter saw in a straight edge, glue it, place it on, ensure it's level, and nail it in with your brad nailer. I mentioned earlier that we recommend having that wainscoting go all the way around the room because it's simple and beautiful. However, you can also end the chair rail at a door frame or at a corner using an edging like this one. Or you can continue it around an outside corner and finish it on an inside corner like we did here on the other side of our room. All three of these ways look absolutely beautiful, and in fact, we used all three of them in our room. Next, you're ready to measure, cut, and install the stiles. Remember to use a corner edging for the corners. So just simply measure and cut them on your miter saw. Make sure to check that they fit because your floor may not be perfectly level. You want them to go in easily like this one does. So make sure that you dry fit every single one to ensure a perfect fit before you glue them on. I also recommend taking the stiles and marking where you had measured where they go before taking the tape off and gluing them on. This will speed up your process so much. Place a little bit of glue and then brad nail, making sure that each stile is level. Then we like to go around with a wipe and just remove any glue that may have oozed out. It can be unavoidable to have stiles that go near outlets. So if you do, just cut it on a 45-degree angle like this. Then once you caulk and paint it, it looks beautiful and you won't even notice it. So just continue on in this way until you reach your corner. And for this style in the corner, we highly recommend using a corner piece like this one that has a concave edge. It just looks so beautiful and like it's perfectly meant to be there. It looks like it's a lot thinner than our stiles from this angle, but it's not. It's very similar. Now we're going to build the outer picture frame moldings. We recommend measuring from the outer edge of one corner to the outer edge of the opposite corner, and then cutting at a 45-degree angle from the outer edge towards the inner edge. And this will equal the total width of your outer picture frame. So make sure to mark where you had that tape before, because once you take it off, it won't be there anymore. Set your miter saw at a 45-degree angle from the outside to the inside edge, so it'll look just like this. Then measure from the outside edge to the opposite outside edge, the exact measurement that you'd like those to be. Draw your line at a 45-degree angle from the inner to the outer, then switch your miter saw to cut at a 45-degree angle opposite that you just did. And now the piece from the outer edge corner to corner should equal the length that you need. A little trick to make the two pieces the exact same: keep one side together, clamp them down, and then mark with your pencil exactly where you need to cut. Then just add your PL, your construction adhesive, and make sure it's level and brad nail it on. Wipe up the excess glue so that you have it nice and clean for caulking later. And when creating the corners, we highly recommend using a carpenter's square, as this just makes sure that it is perfectly square and the joint is perfect. We also recommend using a long straight edge like this one to keep it perfectly level and exactly the same height going from one molding to the next. And just continue on until all of your moldings are finished. Next, you're ready to build the inner moldings. And first, you need to find your inspiration. Mine was the Boiserie style from France, but anywhere in Europe, you find these beautiful, intricate wall moldings. I wanted to create my own design, so I used a plywood base and some clay molds. These are my favorite ones, and I'll put links to all of these materials in the description below, as well as on my website, in a printable list at turmericmecrazy.com. You may be asking, well, why don't you just put the clay molds directly on the wall? You can, but I recommend securing it onto the plywood and then mounting it on the wall. There are lots of pros and cons to this that we took a long time to consider, so you can take your time to read them if you prefer, but I highly recommend taking the time to do it on the plywood. You'll need one piece of plywood per panel, and it's going to fit just inside the inner frame. So the dimensions of it will be the dimensions of the inner frame minus the thickness of the frame. We'd recommend doing about 2 to 3 inches between the outer and the inner frame, but it's really up to you. To calculate the dimensions of the plywood, you're welcome to use this formula that we created here. If you want to test out this layout, here's a way that you can use a measuring tape without having someone else's hands. Just put a piece of painter's tape to hold it exactly at the top of where you're measuring and then pull it straight down. It's as simple as that. We'd highly recommend getting your plywood cut at your local hardware store where you're going to buy the plywood from. Then once you have it, marking the center and drawing a line down the center. This will really help later. Next, we're going to create these beautiful ornate details. I'm going to create a separate video all about this air dry clay that's going to show you all of my tips and tricks because I did a lot of this and I've made several projects that have required air dry clay and I've learned a lot. So I would like to share those in a separate video so that this video doesn't get crazy long. But I put a few tips here on the side and you can see what I'm doing if you'd like to follow along. I tried several different molds and the Iron Orchid design molds are by far the best. I highly recommend them and you can get them from the Rustic Ranch in Airdrie. And it is an incredible little shop owned by a dear friend of mine. She gave me a ton of tips and tricks as well, and I'm going to share all of those, including how to use the IOD molds to create your own designs like I did here. And this is why I love making these designs on the plywood. You can play around with it before you glue it on, and it is just so much easier. Once you figured out exactly how your design is going to look, we're going to use Tight Bond Quick and Thick, which is an excellent glue for this purpose. I just put a little bit on the back and I use a palette knife to spread it around. I usually do use gloves, but I find it when I'm filming so difficult. So please pardon me here. I'm getting it all over my fingers and then just making sure that it looks like it is perfectly square and then very gently press your clay onto the surface and wipe up any excess glue, including cleaning off the lid of your glue every time in between using it, or it will dry out. Clean up your surface of any excess clay and then wait for 24 hours for your clay to dry. Don't be shocked if there's a bunch of cracks and maybe even some gaps where you did not put gaps before. This is a normal part of the process, which is why in my tips and tricks video, I will show you exactly how to fix it and how to prevent it as much as possible. But some cracking and spreading is going to be inevitable. So you can fix it by just using a little piece of clay like this and a palette knife in your fingers. And for the part where it is actually lifted off of the board like it has here, you can use a silicone caulking like this Alex Plus one that I use. And you're just going to cut the tiny tip off the top at a 45-degree angle. For more quick tips and tricks on how to use caulking, check out my video here and it'll explain everything you need to know to caulk edges like a pro. Once you've filled all of the cracks with excess clay and all of the edges with the silicone, you're ready to paint and it is going to look like it's totally part of the wall. After the clay is completely dry, I like to put my vacuum over it just to make sure there's no dust at all before painting. I forgot to film the first coat of paint, but I basically chosen a color for my wall and I'm going to paint over all of these molds before we put this up on the wall. That way, once it's up on the wall and I'm having to have that weird angle, it's not going to hurt my body at all. So I use a small brush to get in all the details and then actually a dry small roller just to get rid of all the lines. Once the first coat is dry, I use a 320 grit sandpaper and just really gently go over the whole thing and around the edges to make sure it's nice and smooth. Cleaning that all up and then ready for another coat of paint. Once I've done the 2 coats of paint, then we're ready to put these panels up onto our wall. On this first panel, I primed the entire panel before putting it up on the wall, but I recommend only painting just around the ornate details and leaving the rest for once you put it on the wall. If you're going to be making panels that have the same design, I highly recommend making measurements and placing a few marks onto your next panel. This will really help to make them look exactly identical. Now we're ready to install the panels on the wall. So I highly recommend just marking with a carpenter's square the exact location where the corners will be. This makes it a lot easier as these panels can be heavy depending on their size. So place a little bit of the PL construction glue on the back, not too much as you want to be able to remove it later if need be. And then making sure that it's level, then you'll just brad nail it in. And I like to double check with a ruler to make sure that it's perfectly even and centered within our outer frame. And when you're brad nailing it in, just make sure to feel that there's no bumps where it may have come off of the wall at all, because if you don't, there could be spots where there's a little bit of bowing happening. So you want to make sure to just press it around, all around, and get an even number of brad nails all throughout. Then just repeat the same process for all of the other panels and you're ready to place on the inner frame. Cutting and installing the inner picture frames is the same as the outer ones, except that we're going to measure from the inner corner of the 45-degree angle to the inner corner of the opposite 45-degree angle. And that will equal exactly the width of the panel. This makes it really easy when cutting. If you just use a pencil and draw that 45-degree angle, it makes it really, really simple. Then take that inside edge and measure the exact measurement of the panel to the other inside edge and use your miter saw to cut at the 45-degree angle and the opposite 45-degree angle on the other side. This will create nice square corners that will hug your panel perfectly. Make sure once cut that you double check that it's a perfect measurement, and you can always use your one cut piece, transfer the measurement over to the opposite piece so that the top and bottom and both sides are equal. And you can use some painter's tape to hold the piece up while you check that all the corners are square before gluing and brad nailing your pieces on. Make sure you place them as snug against the panels as you can so that you don't have as many edges to caulk. This is, of course, one of the cons of using plywood as your base, as you'll need to caulk all of the edges. Repeat this process around all of your panels, making sure that each piece is level before brad nailing it in. I have to admit, this fourth and final step, finishing work, is my least favorite step of any project. However, it is the most crucial step in making your project look beautiful. I highly recommend filling your nail holes with some spackling. I know this takes a little bit more work as it requires sanding. However, you're going to find it just gives the most beautiful finish. I like to use the color changing spackling. It turns white when it's dry, and that's just a really nice indicator to know when we're ready to sand. So I fill all of the plywood nail holes and all of the nail holes on the outer and inner frames with the spackling. And as soon as I see that it's dry, I'll grab a 300 grit sandpaper and very lightly sand, just until I feel it's as smooth as the rest of the surface. Then it's time to caulk all of the edges and the corners. So I use the same Alex Plus caulking and cut it at a 45-degree angle, a little bit lower down this time to make a little bit larger of an opening. Then I caulk the top edge, bottom edge, and corners of every part of the project. And if your nail holes still have a little bit of a divot, here's a little trick. Just throw in a little silicone on top. This will make it nice and smooth. Once we've finished every single corner and edge, we still need to do the wainscoting. For this, I use the silicone in all of the corners and edges, make it nice and smooth, and I use the same spackling to fill the nail holes in the exact same way. This is the most time-consuming part of the project. However, once it's all finished and you begin to paint, you're going to realize that is the most crucial part of the project. There will be no cracks or seams showing and everything will look seamless. With difficult areas, you may want to use a second coat of spackling to cover any gaps that are formed so that you have a nice seamless finish. Sanding is also a crucial step, so grab your sanding block and sand only the edges and the surfaces. Do not sand where the silicone has been applied. Just making sure that every surface is nice and smooth. You will not regret doing this work, trust me. And then make sure to wipe it off or even use your vacuum to have a nice clean canvas for painting. Once you're at this step, you're going to start to see all of your hard work come to fruition. Grab a small detailed brush and a regular painting brush that you would use to paint a wall. A small foam roller does most of the work, so I like to paint it on first with the paintbrush and then follow with this small roller. Then you can use a regular roller to just roll that primer on, and once all of your panels are primed, make sure to have a look for any difficult areas And follow it up with a final quick sand to make sure the entire surface is smooth. Then paint with 2 coats of your favorite color of paint. And that's it. You've now created the most gorgeous French-inspired wall with such beautiful details that you don't even need to hang anything else on the wall. Every time I look at these gorgeous details, I just can't believe that we created it ourselves. It blends seamlessly into the wall and is just so absolutely gorgeous. I hope that you've loved this tutorial, and I hope it inspires you to go ahead and create something beautiful for your large wall. And thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you've loved this video, please support us by giving us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel and share it with anyone you think would love it. We also have a website, turmericmecrazy.com, where we share written instructions for all of our projects. Please visit us there and subscribe to be part of our do-it-yourself community.